Is it an A cap?
Is it an A cap? No A cap, but it
No A
is
cap.
no A cap.
Oh, very depressing. Well, you know
All
what?
cops are peanuts.
You know what is a cap? A
Uh,
cap.
what is a cap?
A cap apparently is what happens.
Hold on, wait.
Oh,
Yes.
a cap is what happens when you exaggerate something, and
Oh,
that became a very
that's
a
why it's
very
called no
useful.
cap.
That's what it's called, no cap,
There you go.
because you're not capitalizing.
It is the etymology of slang, and then when you learn where it actually comes from, you're like, there is.
There's some thought into some
Not only is there
things.
some thought, there's a lot of thought, and like one could say like much more thought than there deserves to be. Like if you see these little seventh graders walking around saying Riz, and you're like, this is just short for charisma. You're like, holy shit, that makes too much sense.
Makes too much
It
sense.
makes too much sense for these little monsters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing. A lot of the slang they're getting it from older people. And then they're like, I don't want to say they're like co-opting it, but they're the ones that like spread it like wildfire.
The pipeline. I've heard the pipeline is gay people to black people to white people.
Fair.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I don't disagree. But you know, you know what is not in the
As
pipeline?
As we're assessing.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to talk about the first Omen.
Yeah.
It's an older movie. It came out back in April. We just did not get a chance to talk about it. I believe we saw Immaculate. Then we went on a bit of a hiatus.
Correct.
And then we came back, and we never came back to this.
And just as I was not prepared for how much sense slang makes, I was not prepared for how similar these movies were.
I mean, I told you, I was like, hey, look, it's like a hot nun spring.
It is Hot Nun Spring, but you see it, you're like, oh, okay, like Hot Nun. Like you think they would have some similarities, but you're like, oh, like these are quite similar.
They are, yeah, they
These
are.
are like they both evolved from the same species. So
They're part of that like twin movie phenomena that
Yes,
we
yes.
get.
this is
Every once
Hitmonchan and Hitmonlee.
This is White House Down and like Olympus Has Fallen. This is Deep Impact and Armageddon. Like movies that you can't. You know, people say that like things are ripoffs of each other,
Right.
but I feel like, especially with how long it really does take to like develop a movie sometimes,
Yeah.
like these are just like straight up coincidences.
Some would say that they'd come from a similar place in like the ethos.
Yeah.
I don't the story of I would love to learn more about how a script becomes a script because like there are stories of movies that like the one we loved, 10 Cloverfield Lane, right?
Yeah.
That was not supposed to be like a Cloverfield movie, right?
No.
And then JJ was like, fuck it, let's do it live, right? But like it is kind of cool how like a script eventually can become an IP or something else. But
Yeah.
as a quick side note before we delve into relevant content, what was the first twin movie summer that you remember as a human being? What's the first time you were like,
Oh, these two movies are
these
the
two
same?
exactly?
I swear I don't.
You know, I
I
got
don't-
mine.
Oh, which
And I
one?
never saw one of them.
Well, maybe I guess the White House Down, Olympus Has Fallen summer.
Oh wow!
I think,
I'm
but
gonna
that's very recent.
I'm gonna go really earlier.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm gonna go to like kindergarten.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah, A Bug's Life and Ants. And like, granted, I've never seen
Huh.
Ants, but like, as someone, and I think A Bug's Life was my. It was either that or like the live action 101 Dalmatians was my first ever movie in theaters. But I was like, two movies about ants.
Oh, shit. These are but ugly. These are cute.
Yeah, even 5-year-old Thano was like, something
Something is amiss here. That's very interesting. No,
Yeah.
I know there are more. I think there's even a whole like Wikipedia article on twin movies.
There has to be.
But I was just like, this is kind of nuts though. That like I said, like they really are
Yeah.
almost non-intentional.
Yeah.
Because like I said, like these things take a while. You can't plan for this type of shit, especially with like possibility of delays, reshoots.
Correct.
I'm looking at a list right now, and there are a lot.
Yeah.
Well, this is two James Bond
They
movies.
both certainly seem to come out of a post Roe v. Wade world.
Okay, can you consider them twin movies if they come out like a year apart?
Was that Ants and Bugs Life?
No, because like Gremlins and Ghoulies is 84 and 85.
Oh.
Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and King Solomon's Mine says 84, 85.
Irish twins. Fucking, fucking Indiana Jones 4 and in National Treasure 2. Twin movies. Minus the aliens, but plus some other stuff.
I think there needs to be.
Bring National Treasure 3, you coward.
There can't be more than like a 4-month gap, I think.
For it to be twin movies.
Yeah, maybe 6 if I'm pushing it, but they definitely need to be like within the same calendar year. If you're telling me they're not, then I feel like that might be a little. Man, I'm looking at this list and a lot of these I would not have put 2 and 2 together. I'm trying to find yours, the one you're talking. Oh, The Craft and Little Witches. That one is Independence Day and Mars Attacks. Okay, Twister and Tornado. There's also the Volcano movie, right? Yeah, Dante's Peak and Volcano. Those are both in '97.
So Ants and A Bug's Life were both in '98. Ants was in October.
Both Jack Frost movies, which are very, very different movies.
There were 2. Oh, and A Bug's Life was in November. So those are twin movies for sure.
Very good.
Which Jack Frost? Which one was the one with the snowman?
So there's Jack Frost, the one with
Jack Nicholson?
not Jack Nicholson.
Michael Keaton.
Michael Keaton.
Where he's the snowman.
Where he's the snowman, and there's this one where there's like a killer, rapey snowman, and it's a terrible movie, dude.
Oh, wow. I mean,
It
even the
is,
Michael Keaton one looks like a terrible movie.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Anyway,
The things you learn while doing a podcast with a friend.
absolutely. But okay, fine. Let's get back into it. So we're talking about the first Omen, which is a prequel to the original,
To the Gregory Peck Omen.
to the very first.
Which I'm eventually
Omen
going to ask
movie.
you how you feel about it, because I didn't realize that going into it. I mean, I knew it was a prequel.
You thought it was a prequel to the 2006 movie?
I just thought it was we talked about this in the last show. Like, are the Planet of the Apes movies a prequel to like the original ones anymore, or like the Tim Burton one or whatever? Like, like that's the thing with franchise. Like, you can have your cake and eat it too until you can't anymore.
I mean, I guess,
Yeah.
but I think there has to be some precise connectivity if you want to like make a point. And I think this movie does work very well because they are trying to tie that into the original movie, because a lot of the lore needs to match.
Yeah.
So like if you're trying to follow or you're trying to establish a lore, you have to be like, okay, well, does the movie that you're quote unquote connecting to, does that make sense?
Right.
And sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. And I feel like this movie does.
It does.
So in this movie we follow what is her name? Nell Tiger Free, which what a name.
What a name indeed.
What a name.
Is she Native American?
I don't necessarily
I mean,
know.
that wouldn't even make sense. But
She's from Britain. So
Wow.
probably not.
definitely not.
But she was in Game of Thrones. She played Marcella Baratheon,
Oh,
who was there for a
wow.
couple episodes and then she disappears, never to be seen again.
Wow.
Yeah.
I see it now.
Yeah,
That's crazy.
that is crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so she's in this movie. She's her lead character.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Lots of Game of Thrones stars in this movie.
yeah,
Charles Dance,
Charles Dance.
Ralph Ineson.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So she goes to Rome to, devote her life to the church.
Yeah.
And you know what? If I said this and I stopped there,
You're like, I can see where this
you'd be
is
like,
going.
you're like, oh, this is immaculate.
Yep.
And I mean, honestly, if you read this whole synopsis, she goes to Rome, begin the life of service of the church, encounters a darkness that causes her to question her faith, and uncovers a terrifying conspiracy that hopes to bring the birth of evil incarnate. That is
That
kind of. So there's a difference, right? There's a difference in where in this movie they're trying to bring forth the Antichrist, whereas in Immaculate
They're just trying to bring.
they're trying to bring back baby Jesus.
Yeah.
Right? And I think we had the discussion during that recording where we were like, wouldn't it be kind of cool if there was like a movie where they try to do that, but instead they, or I think you said, right, they accidentally like cloned the Antichrist.
That was
Your friend's
my friend's mom's writing a book. But I've actually, it was funny, a critic that I kind of follow, or excuse me, someone I follow who's like kind of a movie critic, like he dabbles in it a little bit. Like he read that movie Immaculate as like they were trying to bring back Jesus, but in reality it would have been like the Antichrist. Then Sydney Sweeney like, I mean, Antichrist wasn't the reason why she did it, but like
No,
he read that movie as the baby would have been the Antichrist. So I think there's long story short, I think there are a lot of people who would have seen Immaculate and taken it that way.
Yeah, but I mean that's not the intent, right? Like the
No.
intent of the church in that movie is
Is to
we're trying to
bring
we're
back
trying to
Jesus.
yeah we're trying to get back power
And
by bringing
And he loves it when we wear a red shrink wrap around our
yeah
on our face.
for sure. So just to give like my base non spoiler like thoughts on this movie, like I think it's shot extremely well. There's a lot of really cool visual like imagery in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
I think acting wise, everybody does a good job. There's no one here who feels out of place.
There's a scene where Nell Tiger Free, before she's going into like the final part of the movie, like I think she does a great job doing some body acting.
I want to bring that up later,
Yeah.
but holy shit! I mean, there's a lot of things in this movie where these things are inherently goofy, and I think part of that is like when we saw Immaculate, there were a lot of times where we looked at each other, we kind of like laughed
Yeah.
because like if someone is not hitting that nail right, then it has that tendency to jump from like serious to goofy. And I feel like this movie never crossed that line for me.
There were a couple moments. I think so. It's funny. When I was a wee boy, for some reason, I don't know where I got this thought because no one explicitly told it to me, but I thought like, good kids don't watch horror movies. Bad kids do watch horror movies. I know.
Thano is judging.
I can judge. I'm full of judgment. But I think one of the ways I was able to transition into a horror fan from being someone who kind of like avoided it as a child was like the first few I'd see in theaters, I'd be like, oh, these are like actually hilarious. So
Some of them can be.
So then I was with friends, when I was with friends who like couldn't handle horror, I'm like, no, it's like really funny. Just like treat it like a comedy and
Yeah.
like you'll make it through. And there were a couple moments in this movie where I did have that moment of like, oh, this is
Kind of funny.
unintentionally funny, but
And it can be.
yeah,
But I think it's
sometimes
also
some tentacle stuff.
Yeah. But I think even when you treat it like that, like it's like a I don't want to say it's like a coping mechanism,
Yeah,
but it kind of is. But there's some times where like it's not even that, it is genuinely like bad, and
right.
then that crosses into funny. And I feel like in Immaculate there were a few times where I was like, oh, this is that kind of funny.
yeah.
Whereas in this, I'm like, oh, I
Well-
can see the humor in it, but it's still objectively like fucking horrifying.
It's funny. I think Immaculate is the bolder movie and the bolder story,
Okay.
but I think this is the better movie.
Yeah, I think what they're trying to do with it, and I think both of these movies are trying to do different things out of the
And-
same concept.
And similar things, right? Like, yes, the concept is what lends to the similar things, but I think there's a lot of, like I said at the beginning of the show, like, I think these both definitely come out of like a post Roe v. Wade
Absolutely.
America. Yeah.
But I think that's also kind of like one of the reasons why I need to like ding Immaculate a little bit, because
Mhm.
Immaculate had the benefit of being a standalone movie.
Yeah.
So that means you're allowed to essentially go as ham as you want.
Yeah.
Whereas in this movie, like you are chaining yourself to a franchise, which
Right.
means you have to pay things off. Otherwise, what's the point of you being a prequel?
You have to use that killer soundtrack.
Absolutely.
um,
I will say I can't really find a lot of negatives except for like it is a little cliche, obviously, but that comes with the territory of you are going back to a movie that originated a lot of these tropes.
Yes.
and that is always a bit of a like it's hard. It feels wrong to call a movie derivative when it's being derivative of
Of the
itself.
thing
It's
of
this
the
like whole like
yeah.
Ouroboros type of thing, right?
Yeah.
So like, you can't avoid that.
I think I have a similar critique in the sense like I feel like one of the worst things you can say about this movie is that it is an Omen movie, and like I'm someone who really loved the first Omen. Like that's one of the first movies.
Did you really?
I mean I watched it in like middle school or early high school
That's nuts.
on YouTube in like parts. Like,
Back when it was like split into 20 parts.
15,
Holy
right?
shit!
Yeah, in our office upstairs, which was like
Ooh.
poorly ventilated, and yeah, but I loved that as a kid. And like it's one of those things where like and this is where I had mixed feelings about it being tied specifically to the first one, because I was like, I mean, those sequels exist, but it's like if you were to really franchise out this movie, right? The only quote unquote logical conclusion is something goofy as shit.
Yeah.
Like anytime like you get to the point where franchise does, okay, here's the Antichrist baby, now here's the sequel where you get to see the Antichrist baby doing Antichrist shit. Like it's just always silly.
and that's I do want to bring that up a little bit later. But let's get into like the actual movie itself.
Yeah.
I love the cold open to this.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really good in like setting up like a character that like if you've never seen the movies, like doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But if you've seen the movies, then what this scene represents.
Yeah.
Right. As someone who hadn't seen the original movie in like such a long time, I had a similar experience back when Hulu was first starting off. No. I believe this was one of the movies on there.
Oh,
me and my cousins.
Service.
Yeah.
Do you know where Hulu actually like started off pre like as a streaming service?
Maybe
it used to show like Family Guys and Simpsons clips on YouTube. There's like Viacom is like the company that like produces music videos.
Oh, really?
Like if you wanted a non-bootleg Family Guy clip, it was posted from Hulu.
Oh, that's interesting.
It was so interesting.
That's funny.
And no one remembers that but me.
It's fucking funny. That's fucking funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, this was one of the movies that was on there. I don't know if it's because like they've always had ties to like Fox.
Yeah.
For the longest time. But like that's how I watched it when I was like 13, 14 years old with my cousins. And like seeing Father Brennan like essentially watch like his future in front of him.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
And it's also like it's both weirdly violent but also weirdly not violent at the same time.
The cold opening.
The cold opening, because like he gets hit by that pipe.
Yeah.
And like, at first you're like, oh, he didn't get hit.
Right.
And then is when you see like his fucking brain, you're like, oh, that's fucking dope.
He
definitely got hit.
He got hit.
But like, it's really cool foreshadowing. So like, if you're like a fan, you're like taking this is a nod to that. What is the purpose of, or at least in your interpretation, like what is the purpose of setting this during like this political turmoil happening? Aside from the obvious, like
that you have to if you want to make it a prequel.
Kind of. So like, there's the way I see it is like they phrase this as like there's a left wing uprising, which then has to me says like, oh, there's this whole thing about like the anti-abortion, pro-abortion debate, right?
Interesting.
Like people are upset, and who is usually upset about the taking away of like women's autonomy?
Right.
Well, it would usually be the left, right? So that's how I'm interpreting it. I don't know. Like you seem to be more worldly than I am, so I wanted to get your take on this.
So this was actually a point where I was like, I think if this movie released during the papacy of Pope Benedict, I feel like it would have hit harder because like you have this unrest and people were like, and no one like is really like trusting the church anymore. So like you got like Father Bennett's like there's a church that we're a part of, and then there's this other church, which like, he doesn't say pedos, but it's like that's where the pedos are, and they want to stay in power, right? And they need like to create something to fear for them to stay in power. And then, like, to me, like, speaking as like a non-Catholic, like, that doesn't resonate as much at home when you've got like probably the most liberal pope ever,
Yeah.
right? And you're but Pope Benedict had a reputation for being like a more austere pope. So I'm like, if this came out like in 2009, I'd
Yeah.
be like hits,
Yeah.
right? Other than that, like, I mean, I guess in general, there's like less of a trust in authority now.
Yeah.
Um, and maybe I mean it's certainly it's interesting in like our own church, like that's something that we've been grappling with. Like you can't just like make people come to church because if they don't, they'll be like, like God will be very very cross. So that's out the door, but that's not really the angle this movie takes to it. So long story short, when I was watching it, I was like, this movie I feel like could have been even better if it came out like ironically in 2006 when
That's fair.
when the last one came out.
But anyway, so after they arrive, we're introduced to like our main cast. We have the nuns. They're all kind of weird. They all seem nice-ish, but you know like they're gonna get weird.
Yeah.
We meet like a hot friend named Luce, who is not not a nun yet. She's like a nun in training.
I want to, because I've seen pictures of like smoking nuns back in the day.
Smoking nuns.
I want to. I really want to know what was the percentage of like hot nuns who were hitting the town.
Oh, hot nuns. Interesting.
Who were hitting it? Maybe not hot because everybody was less hot back then.
I don't know, man. Luce was pretty hot.
I mean, in IRL. But I mean, like, Luce was like, living my life before I take my vows.
Before you take your vows.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess that's also a question too. Like, is this really just before she takes her vows, or is this like something that people would just do because like you need to cut loose sometimes?
And this exactly, but then this also. Now I'm jumping, but like like you find out later, like Luce is part of the cabal, right?
Yeah.
And then you're like, and then I think that's where I get back to my critique of like my biggest critique is that this is an Omen movie, and that just makes it inherently silly. Because it's like there's this many like women in 1970 whatever who are like coming from all over the place to join like the Satan cabal inside the Catholic Church. Like,
yeah,
it is kind of bonkers if you stop to like give more logic to it than honestly you should. But aside,
so there is that.
Yeah.
And I do have a comment to make on that later when I talk about some of the visuals that like kind of stuck out to me a bit.
Yeah.
But like so she meets Luce and they go clubbing. And we later find out that like this was part of the plan, right?
To take her out.
Yeah. Right? She goes out, they get drunk, I love that line though when she's talking about like I am a teacher and I love to teach.
Farfalla.
And in reality, she's saying, "I am a butterfly. I must fly."
Which, I saw that, I'm like, this is supposed to be a theme. I don't know, but like, yeah.
I don't know. I just thought it was really fucking funny.
The word farfalla is very funny.
It is farfalla. Yeah, it's very funny. I just thought that scene of her like waking up, it just kind of gives you like a very uneasy feeling. Because like the whole time she just looks very put together.
Yeah.
And then she just wakes up and she is a fucking mess.
Well, it's funny because that was like when I was watching it, I thought I was like, okay, what trouble is she about to get into? Because like, I mean,
and there's zero repercussions.
Which when you look back at what was happening, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But you're like, and not just like being out, but also like, I mean, when you live in a monastery, like, there's a schedule.
Talk.
Yeah. So I was
well, like, yeah, I mean, but my understanding was when they're doing this, they're not doing this like on the up and up. They are sneaking out and sneaking in. So like,
yes, I get that.
So curfew and doors out and lights out, whatever, like that goes out the window. But I thought like maybe she was gonna talk to like the nuns and be like, hey, like I did this, I'm feeling conflicted.
Yeah.
And then some shenanigans. But no, like it's just there's like a switch where she just looks a bit off.
Correct.
And she is regretful that she did this. Like she does not feel like even the way she's dressed, she's not comfortable.
Yeah.
Her big like
she feels naked.
Yeah. And I don't know. I thought that was interesting, but this leads to like kind of meeting Carlita more. We get a glimpse of her. She's this weird, like stereotypical creepy kid
Yeah.
in the movie. I think the actress does a good job at like making her feel both animalistic but also like vulnerable
Yes.
at the same time. And I think you need that.
When you watch this movie, since you are a connoisseur of horror, I'm gonna call. I have no better word than to call this like the Charlie effect.
The Charlie effect.
Where you're like, this is the creepy kid of the movie.
Yeah.
And then you find out like, this is not the creepy kid of the movie.
That's why I called her the red herring.
Yes.
Yes.
Which is probably a better term, but like I'll use the Charlie effect. When you saw Carlita, actually no Charlie effect because Carlita is the female form of Charlie, so I'm gonna keep Charlie effect.
Look at that.
When you saw
that works.
When you saw Carlita, you're like, it's not gonna be her. It's gonna be something.
It's
else.
something else. Yeah. I feel like that's part of like this like I don't want to call it like elevated horror effect because like I don't feel like this movie is that type of movie.
No.
But I think it has trained audiences to be on the lookout for like what is too obvious.
Well, we started talking about how like, shows like Acolyte, like they feel like they're not up to budget, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I made the comment, we're like, well, not everything can be Game of Thrones, but still, you can tell like all those shows exist in a post
Game of Thrones,
yes,
yeah.
Yeah.
Not even a post HBO, post Game of Thrones specifically, right? Post like Breaking Bad specifically.
The golden
like
age.
You need you can no longer go back to like
you need to seem like your peak TV.
And I it sounds bad, but I think overall movies are better for it.
I think so too.
And TV shows are better for it.
Yeah.
Because it has led to a consistent stream of like legitimately good movies and good TV shows.
Yes.
Right?
I mean, like, say what we will about schlock. Like, schlock has its place. But
I love schlock.
But I feel like there was an abundance of schlock. Like, there was too much schlock. And I think now I think we've put schlock in the proper corner of the house.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So as we are like getting to like know Carlita, this is where Margaret starts like unraveling a little bit. Mm-hmm. We get that weirdly disgusting birth scene.
Yeah.
Which I remember watching the movie. I was in the theater by myself and I was like, what the fuck am I watching? Holy shit.
I saw too much.
Apparently, I did read about this. Yeah. That scene alone, they were like, you cannot, this is going to be like NC-17.
Oh, yeah.
And they cut it down and I'm like, this is still a hard sell.
It goes
you get pretty very long
right in there.
You are all up in that business.
Exactly. Much more than
But here's the thing. There is something to be said about just how genuinely like terrifying birth can be.
Yeah.
But then like when you see that hand come out,
yeah,
you're like, wait a minute. Oh no.
They say to trim the nails when going in. You also need to when going out.
But like all of this is an effect of this is all in her head. That's how I took it. Like
I was wondering how you took it. Is this a birth that's actually happening?
So I think it is a birth that is actually happening.
Yeah.
But this is the beginning of her starting to have these hallucinations, which is not the first time that she has them.
Right.
Right. We get a couple scenes later where something is amiss.
Yeah.
Right. So that's how I took it. Because I'm even like questioning, like, this is all in her head.
That's fair.
Yes? I don't know. Do you take this as literal?
I was wondering, like, is it supposed to be like a trial run demon birth? But I'm like, but it's not June 6th.
It's not June 6th. It wouldn't make sense.
So then, like, all in her head would be the most logical conclusion. Maybe it was like an actual birth that she saw, and then, like, Satan superimposed the CGI on there.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this is all an effect of like her subconscious telling her what happened to her.
Yeah.
After the club, right?
Yeah.
Which we'll touch on a little bit later. So right after this, though, this is where we're introduced again to Father Brennan talking to Margaret, and then that also led me to another questions like, does Father Brennan know Margaret? Does he reach out to her? Because like she just shows up to his place, right? Like she gets a card, I think, and then she goes.
So he meets her on the street, and he's like, "I know you, right?"
Is that what it is? I can't remember.
Yeah, he meets her on the street, and then he's like, "Come tonight Like some
Yeah.
bad shit's get to start.
Bad
happening.
shit's happening, right?
Gonna start happening to Carlita specifically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And all right. So here's my question. Let's say you are like 99% sure that this is the kid
From Father Brennan's
from Father
perspective?
Brennan's perspective.
Yeah. Like you think she's
Like
gonna be
what is his like end game here? Is it like let's off Carlita, or is it like nature versus nurture? Let's race her instead.
This is a very good question, and once again, I think it goes back to my central critique of like this movie's biggest problem is that it is an Omen movie. Because like if you stop to think about it more than like
more than a second,
yeah, like everything's wonky, right? I don't know what is like. I don't know what his end game is, and I think a truly elevated Omen movie would be one that would like try to answer these questions, like what is the rogue priest gonna do? Like, what is his plan for like finding the Antichrist mom? Or like, why are all these women flocking to like, why are all these women flocking to like the Satan cabal, right?
But then that also leads to a different thing later on that I do kind of wonder. So like, how much of this is premeditated on the church's behalf, right?
The church or the church?
Well, like the the culty church,
yeah,
right? Let's call it what it is. Like they're essentially a cult, right?
Right.
So like, we know that they are like a sect of, right, the church, and yeah, we see quite a few people involved. Like in the grand scheme of the movie, like yes, it seems like it's 90% of the characters that we see, but like in the grand scheme of the church overall, like it's probably a small percentage, right?
And that's how you can set it. It's like in this, and that's what Immaculate does. It chooses to set it like in this convent.
Exactly. Right. And so then that also goes off with this, like how many of the nuns that we do see technically is this whole place where they are at? Is this all in
Satan
like
nuns?
Yeah.
I think in this convent specifically, there's a lot of Satan nuns.
A lot of sleeper agents.
Yeah, specifically since like Cardinal Lawrence seems to run it, like, and he's a Satan cardinal.
Yeah.
Like, I would say there's a lot of Satan nuns in this specific.
Yeah, so like I don't feel like that's necessarily like then too far fetched to be like, oh shit, Luz was also in on it. Oh shit.
Yeah.
So and so is also in on it. So like I can kind of like logic that off in my head. But then I also start thinking about like, what if like you meet a friend and they're like, oh, I want to go see your convent, and you're like, ah.
Well, that's, I mean, but that goes
Listen.
to, I mean, this touches at the biggest problem of like mass conspiracies. Like if the Bush administration really brought down the Twin Towers, like you would need a lot of people.
Oh, too many people
to be in on that, right?
Too many people.
Even if you just have like one Satan convent, like the amount of like crisscross and back and forth that just happens between religious institutions like within the Catholic Church is so immense that like this would get out.
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
And I mean, and in real life, I do think like to counter my argument, like you do have the problem of pedophilia in the Catholic Church, and it is something that is like can be a very widespread cover up, where you're like, holy shit, like these bad apples rotted a lot of the bag.
Yeah,
right.
I think the problem though is like you can't start looking at this movie with like real world logic. You have to treat a horror movie with horror movie,
right?
Not just horror, like not just Omen, like just in general, like you have to treat these movies with like horror movie logic, right?
Yeah.
Which is fine. I'm perfectly fine doing that. But it is one of those things, kind of like when we talked about The Watchers, like when you start to think about some things, you're like, wait a minute.
I think that's also why we can't really fully call it elevated.
I think an elevated movie kind of covers its bases a little bit better.
Because you can watch Hereditary or The Witch with a very different frame of logic that you would watch this movie with.
For sure.
Yeah.
By the way, I like all the callbacks. I kind of having the nun hang herself like is very
Dude, that was the triple threat. It was the jumping off the building,
hanging yourself, and demolition.
Yeah, I was like, Jesus,
it's
and bonking against the window.
And again, I feel like in a lesser movie, that would come off as like cheesy and way derivative. And again, it is.
Yeah.
but because the movie does it in a way that like you feel like it's being like it's treating the series with like the respect that it should.
Do you think part of it is helpful that like the original scene is
Already goofy as fuck.
yes?
I'm doing this for you.
It's all
Damien.
for you, Damien.
Oh boy. I think it helps because
Yeah.
this is not like she doesn't say. If I remember correctly, I don't think she says anything.
She says it's all for you. But
Does she?
She whispers it.
Oh, okay.
She doesn't say a name, right? And then this is where some of that humor comes in when you're like, oh, on fire, and this is quite a bit. But yes, I think it is. They made that scene as serious
As you can.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, when you have those three things like
Yeah.
happening at the same time, like it reaches that like absurdity level. But I think this was pretty good.
You know what I just noticed?
What?
I mean, I kind of noticed it when I was watching, but now I just noticed in this podcast. That's like the only thing that happens. Like he's like, bad stuff's gonna start happening around Carlita, right? And like in the original movies, like there's bad stuff happening like all the time. But this is like the one real like physical supernatural thing that's definitely not just a hallucination. That you're like,
Well, there's
oh,
also
shit.
there's that. There's I guess you can make the argument that there's a couple things happening around not Carlita, but around Margaret.
Margaret.
Right?
Yeah.
You have which actually is like the next scene, which is like there's like a riot that just like randomly starts
Yep.
at the museum when they're at the field trip, right? Where she sees like the burnt ass body of Sister Angelica. Which is where they basically tell her like, hey, you gotta get the fuck away from that kid.
Yep.
She's like, by the way, so we have this scene where they reveal the plan to Margaret,
Yeah.
and I'm like, what makes you think that you're just gonna be like, I'm gonna birth the Antichrist, and he's gonna do what I say?
Well, that's the other thing. Like, as a religious person, and I commented this on during Immaculate.
Sure.
Like, if you come at this with like the full like arsenal of criticism, then you just seem like you're going overkill.
For sure.
Like, they also don't really get the OG text, and I think that's just a symptom of the fact that like culture in general like doesn't really get the OG text. So like, correct, when you logic this out,
It doesn't make any fucking
doesn't make any
sense.
sense. I thought it was hilarious. Like as she's giving birth, like the camera, like not that it focuses on her cross, but like her cross is like always in frame while she's like giving birth to the Antichrist. And I'm like, I bet in the manual, like he would not prefer that.
Yeah, probably not.
They do their cross,
They do their cross,
and I'm like, I also feel like he would not prefer.
and that's the point. That's the whole thing, right? Like, cause we're told that they are a part of the church.
Yes.
That's going to like extreme lengths to bring the church back to power.
And they're doing this as a hope that like people will be so scared of the Antichrist that they'll come back to the church.
There's so much wrong with this like train of thought.
There is and the best argument that I can give it for it is biblically there is a belief that like God allows bad stuff to happen so that like people can like change their ways, right? But like that's like God bringing the storm. It's not like let's clone the baby and right.
Yeah.
So there's it's silly. It's fun
For sure.
It's fun, but it is silly.
So Margaret's not allowed to take her vows, and she goes on the walk, and she meets Paolo.
Right.
And dude, this poor dude, he looks fucking miserable.
So he's the guy she meets at the club, right?
Yeah.
So it's funny. He gets into an accident, and she's like holding him.
Dude,
And
he gets like animated. We call it isekai in the anime community.
There's
a gif
Yeah.
of someone just getting hit by a truck.
And it's funny because like as she's like holding him afterwards, I'm like, wait, shouldn't he be? And then she
absolutely.
And then she realized
I had the exact same thought, and it's that
That's funny.
fraction from like between like horrifying
Yeah.
and genuinely hilarious.
Yeah.
Because she's standing there and his guts and blood are just like pouring
Yeah.
out, and she's like, "Oh no."
So for me, it crosses the line.
It does. It does. It is genuinely funny.
Yeah.
But it does not lose the fact that it is a horrifying thing to like be like, oh shit, this dude that like I kind of like just got pinned to the wall.
So it made me a little confused. I guess the movie kind of like lets you fill in the gaps by yourself, and it doesn't hold your hand to it so much. But like he shows up, and at that point you're like, okay, clearly like this guy just wasn't some dude at a club. Like clearly he knows some shit. And then she finds out later that he was saying, oh, like find the mark.
You got to find the mark, yeah.
And then she finds the mark on her head. And
Later,
then,
yeah.
And then you find out in the vision that he was in on like the impregnation ceremony, right?
Yes.
But then you're just like, but who is this guy?
Well, I mean, there's that. I think it's also one of those things where like they do make a point to show him, and he does not look like he's having a good time.
He's
and there are other people who are like, hell yes, you go, Jekyll, you give it to this unwilling woman.
Which makes me wonder, like, how. I want to know Carlo's backstory. How did he make? I want to know.
Oh, Paulo.
Paulo, excuse me.
Yeah,
I want to know Paulo's backstory.
And I think it's one of those things where like the abstract idea versus the actuality of it.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's people who are like, I want someone to stomp on my balls.
Yeah.
And then when someone's actually stomping on your balls, you're like, oh no, I was wrong.
Yeah.
Right? I think it's that. I think it's the idea of like someone could have very well been like, hey, you want to strengthen the church? We're gonna do this crazy thing.
Yeah.
And he's like, all right, whatever.
Meet me at midnight. Take this black robe.
And then like when he's actually seeing like the horrifying nature of what his acts are doing, that he's like, oh shit,
yeah,
this is not good.
Yeah,
that's how I took it.
That makes sense.
Because I mean, he does not look like he's having a good time when that camera pans on his face.
Nope.
He looks like, oh, I made the worst friends.
But once again, like when you logic it too much, you're like, so they're evangelizing, but like willing to bring people to the basement.
But even then, it's I think it's one of those things where like, if you think about how many times they have tried this,
yeah,
like
he could have been one of those right-wing protesters.
Yeah,
probably.
Yeah. So anyway, after this, like she's having a bad time. She steals documents, she gets caught, and the Carlita gets taken away from her.
Yep.
And this is where we see the mouth, right? Carlita opens her mouth and she sees
the 666,
which is a very cool design.
It is a cool design. And that's the design from the original.
Yeah.
From the original movie.
But like I like having it in a place that's like kind of both obscure but like kind of weirdly funny.
Yeah.
Because then I'm just thinking, like, imagine if like she goes to the dentist and the doctor's like, "What the fuck?"
Dude, imagine if what happens if she like eats some really hot pizza and she burns that part of the mouth while you do.
Yeah, I don't know. But this is kind of where we start to like dive into like the history, right?
Yeah.
Where she finds out that like Carlita's not actually like she's not actually the person. Right? Because the mark they're looking for is on the head.
Yeah.
Which I'm just like, maybe it's a girl thing, but like, I mean, I guess it is definitely a girl thing, right? Like, if you never had your hair short, how the fuck would you know
that the mark was there?
That the mark was there, and then like, if her quote unquote parents, I'm assuming I don't think she makes notion that she's been adopted, right?
I don't think so.
Right?
She was a ward of the church all her life. That's what they say.
Oh, so then that means that she just lived with the church her whole life.
Correct.
And so no parents probably.
Correct.
So yeah, I mean, and that then checks out, because then that means that her sect, where she has been with, they've all been in cahoots, because they're the ones that specifically sent her to Rome, right? Exactly. Now that she's, I'm assuming turned 18.
Birthing age. Oh, that's nice that
They did say when she is of age.
That is nice that the pedophile
They were like
cares about the age.
They were like, no pedophilia here. No, that's why Carlita is not used.
Not ready.
Yeah, because they say she's not ready.
Right.
Which again, say what you will about the Antichrist. He has standards.
What's the line from the Joker? There's two lines. There's the one, I'll fight Batman, but the IRS, no, thank you. Or like the DC Marvel movie, where he's like, and he's fighting Red Skull, but he's like, I may be these many things, but a Nazi.
Yeah. I mean, it's that, right? Yeah. So she has her, like, realization that Paulo was talking about, like, her mark.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where we get to see the nasty shit that happened to her.
Yeah.
Where she gets God. This is where we get that cool-ass, like, visual where she's like, is this what you're talking about? Where she's like bent backwards and like she like levitates and like her face is all fucked up.
I was talking about that. That is cool. I was talking about when she's walking to the birthing place, and she's like barking, and she's also contorting out of like the back seat of the car.
Oh, that's it. Yeah. So yeah, that leads to that. So like she's like kind of starting to like struggle. They're gonna go like pop that baby out.
Yep.
And kill it.
Yep.
And then they get got.
Right.
And then her belly goes from like 0 to 6 months.
Yeah.
In an instant.
And you know what? After the birth, she looks great.
Hey, man.
Lots of mothers would kill for that.
Lots of mothers would kill for that. This is a new development, though, because I don't remember there ever being talk of a twin.
No.
In the originals.
Which then makes you wonder what
their plan is.
Yes, because clearly, if there's not a plan, there's at least like a plan for there to be a plan. Because you don't have this like beautiful matriarchal society of like almost lesbians, right? Like her entire aesthetic.
Are they technically sisters?
Her and Carla.
Her and Carlita, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Because they have the same dad.
Is it the same jackal?
I would assume.
Anyway, well, it's supposed to mate with its kin.
With its own offspring, right?
Anyway, beside the point, like and I'm not saying there's a romantic relationship within them, but there is some sort of like, these are rugged women out, living by themselves, no man. Uh-huh. Her entire wardrobe is like totally like
the same,
totally no different.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, like it almost feels like it's a different movie, and you're like, I have no idea where they're gonna take this.
Yeah, I don't know.
Especially since it is officially tied to the Gregory Peck movie,
and that's kind of the question too that I post here in my notes. Where I'm like, what's the point? So like the point of tying it is obviously to like you want to have that connectivity to like the original movie.
Right.
You
didn't have to show his picture.
You didn't have to show his picture.
Yeah.
Or you could have shown maybe an actor's picture and the same name as the guy.
Yeah.
And then you'd be like, oh, like
or you could have just said the ambassador of Rome.
The ambassador, yeah, the U.S. ambassador of Rome, right? Yes.
Yep.
And I don't know, like, are they going to then try to remake the original, like update it and include Margaret and Carlita and the new...
Does this baby have a name?
I don't think they gave it a name.
Yeah.
So like, is this going anywhere? And I haven't heard anything. The movie made okay money.
Yeah.
This movie was apparently supposed to be going straight to Hulu.
Oh,
they were going to do the same thing as Prey.
Yeah.
And then because of movie theaters needing more movies, and then with the success of a movie like Prey.
What a shame if there would have been a really good movie that was just straight to streaming and not able to see in theaters.
Except for one obscure theater in the reservation.
I would hate that, and like I would hate to have to review a movie that basically did that today.
I mean, like, but that's also like those were like weird situations, right?
Right.
Like, even back then, what was it, 2021? Late 2021? Maybe 2022?
For Prey?
For Prey?
I mean, I'm talking about Hitman.
Oh, that's different.
Yes.
But anyway, I don't know. I kind of like that this got the Evil Dead Rise treatment, where like they were like, this movie's good. Like, is it perfect? No.
Yeah.
Is it like the best movie? No. It's definitely in my like right now in my favorites of the year.
But you lean into what it is.
But like if you put it out there and you market it well, like
Yeah.
people will go and everything. So like I'm hoping this kind of stops that like idea of, so like Netflix I kind of understand. I still hate it
Mm-hmm.
that they will have a really good movie and then they're like, haha,
Joke's on you.
I hope you can go to the theater this one specific week.
Right.
Otherwise, fuck you. I get that's their MO. But like Disney and like 20th Century
Studios, yeah.
like what the fuck?
Right.
Like you have no business doing that.
Correct.
Same with
especially when you got the brand on your side.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. This does lead really quick before we wrap on this. Is there a rise in religious horror? Because I've seen this argument. One of my I don't want to say he's like one of my favorite like horror YouTubers.
Mm-hmm.
I like his videos and he's funny. But he made a video where he was like, I'm done with religious horror.
Oh.
And he was like, it's oversaturated. And he's like, it's abundant, especially now. And I'm like,
I don't think
it's always been
I think
there.
it's always been there. I mean, Father, what's his name? I'm forgetting the priest's name.
In this movie?
Yeah.
Brennan?
Brennan. Like his hat straight up looks like the dude from The Exorcist.
Yeah.
Right. No, I think it's definitely always been there. In fact, after I was watching it, there's a great James Baldwin essay about The Exorcist that talks about horror. That I can't remember if it mentions the Omen as well. But religious horror has always been there. I don't think there's necessarily a rise. To me, as like a religious person, I do like, to me the more interesting question that I have, it's like you can see the good critiques of like religion that these movies make, and yet all of them always have like a couple of like religious protagonists, right? Even if they're operating from like without the bounds of like the church. Like he even says like there's the church and there's the church. And I'm like, okay, so you are part of like the church. So it's interesting to see that like even in these movies that like do take their fair shots at religion, like they don't completely like
get rid of
throw
religion.
it away.
Yeah, like they're not fully shitting on religion.
Yeah. So that phenomenon, and it's not even a phenomenon I'm tired of. I think that to me is a question that I have is why does it seem to usually go that way?
So funny so I can't remember if I mentioned this when we talked about the Conjuring movie, but like one of the authors of the Conjuring is a very deeply religious person.
Yeah.
And he always one of the interviews that like I've seen of him, he mentions he's like if you want to like justify your religion, like you believing so much, having faith in your religion with a greater good, you have to kind of be conscious like there has to be the opposite, right?
Yep.
The bad.
Yep.
And what better way to show that than to show horror in which like my good is overcoming the bad.
Yeah.
Whether that is a criticism of like the church itself, which I think sometimes deserves criticism,
it
right?
often does. Yeah.
But like in the Conjuring movies, like who are the heroes?
They're these two
the
religious
Warrens,
scam artists, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Right.
in
Correct.
in the universe,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
I love movie version Patrick Warren. No, not Patrick Warren. Edward Warren, right?
Yeah.
So like even as someone who's not religious and all that stuff, like it makes me cheer for like the religious protagonist. Like in Immaculate, who's our protagonist? Like a deeply devoted nun, right?
Yep. Even Midnight Mass, I mean that one like does take like certain like explicit like charges against religion, and yet like the parent characters are never cast in like a villainous light, right? You have Raul's character, the sheriff, like the Muslim family, right?
Mhm.
Like they get to pray before like the sun like, eradicates them as vampires, right? So like even there, like there's space for like they get killed by the sun, right? I can't remember.
The sun does.
The sun gets killed by the sun.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like even in those movies, there's like space for like religious people to do their thing.
Dude, how fucking good is Midnight Mass?
So fucking good.
God damn.
So fucking good. But yeah, no, I don't think. And you know what? I think you'll never. I don't think you'll really fully escape religious horror because like two things. One's like a very like caveman argument, but like, hey, you don't know what's scarier than a ghost? A fucking demon.
Demon.
A. B. Like a lot of the aesthetic from the Catholic Church that just like lends itself to horror.
Yeah.
And then even like the aesthetic of like a weird like evangelical pastor in like bumfuck Missouri, right?
Yeah.
Who's got his own cult, like that lends itself to horror really well. So
For sure.
it's not going anywhere.
Yeah, no, and I mean, if you think about scary movies, there really is not that much
That you can
that
do.
you can do.
Yeah.
Like, it's either ghosts, a monster,
Yeah.
or demons, which are, I don't want to say they're inherently
Oftentimes-
religious.
Oftentimes those things kind of intersect.
A lot of times
Yeah.
they do intersect, right?
Yeah.
Some people will blend like demons and vampires.
Yeah.
I know Buffy the Vampire Slayer does that a lot, where like vampires are a demon trapped in a human.
Well, and that's what the original
Body.
mythology was, right?
Yeah.
Even Hereditary, like, yeah.
Hereditary.
We're
is
just
really-
missing John Wick, right?
Hell yeah!
But like, it can like go.
It is
this way.
weirdly religious.
Well, it's funny if you take out one line, it can be like much less of a religious movie. But like at the end, they're like, "Hail Payman," like we reject the Trinity, and like blah blah blah. And it's like, all right, but like now it's explicitly a religious movie.
Absolutely.
So yeah,
I don't know. I don't agree with that. I do think that like religious horror is, I don't want to say it's like on the, again, I don't want to say it's on the rise.
it's just
I
always been
just
there.
think it's there, and I think it helps that there's been some like high profile religious movies
Yeah,
that have maybe made it seem like it's on the rise. I don't think there's making any more religious movies than there were before. I just think is like we talk about movies like The Conjuring.
Yep.
We talk about movies like this one.
has this person never seen like a twin movie summer before?
Dude,
Is that really Is that really why?
I have no idea, man. But like, I just think it helps that like the movies are good and that gives them a spotlight.
Yep.
And that's my 2 cents on this.
Yeah.
I don't know. I had a really good time on this.
Same.
I do find it funny that the audience score is 69.
Nice.
Very nice.
And the critic score is 81.
81.
If I were to have bet beforehand which one would be higher, I think I would have bet audience scores were, but I think maybe critics are walking into this knowing
What it is.
what it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so too. And also, like, I think an actual critic will take into consideration a lot of things like the acting, like the craft,
Yeah.
the cinematography, the score, whereas like the audience will be like, not enough, blah blah blah,
Yeah.
in this, not enough Damien.
Hashtag man online.
Hashtag mad online. Anyway, speaking of being mad online, you can find us online.
You can find us online.
You can find us on all the platforms.
Yep.
I think. Well, apparently we're on YouTube now.
Are we really?
Well, because YouTube merged like its podcast service
With Google?
with like its Google podcast, so
Yeah.
now we're technically on YouTube.
I didn't know that.
So
Isn't that like? Don't you think that's something that just should have happened a long time ago?
Mhm.
Like, is YouTube Red officially still a thing? Or
yeah, well
okay,
now it's called YouTube Premium.
got you. But like, okay, so but there was a time when there was like, where they were kind of separate things. And it's
Yeah.
like, just fucking pull it all on one.
The weird thing to me was the fact that Google Podcast and Google Music were separate.
That's bonkers.
Because like,
You're-
just merge your two things.
Do you remember Google Video?
Google Video.
Google
Yeah,
Video.
that shit was
Yeah.
a pain in the ass.
But you could find some stuff there that you couldn't find on the that you couldn't find on the YouTubes.
Well, people can go find us online.
Yeah.
Share our podcast with your friends. Katie has been networking for us,
Nice.
so that's been good. Tell us what movie you want us to see. I have a proposition for Thano for later on
I've got a proposition for Javi for later on.
So we will be back very shortly with another
Big
movie that should have been in theaters probably.
Yeah.
But until next time, he has been Tano.
He has been Javier, and he just gained a subscriber.
Woo! And this has been the Cine-Scoots movie show. Bye.
Bye.